Hi everybody, and welcome to Bridging Plural Experiences Community Inclusion Panel. We're the panel moderator, our name is the Crisses, and we would like to introduce you to some of our panelists. If you could please say your name and let us know just a tiny bit about you.
Hi, our name is Dr. Serenity Salcesion. We're a licensed psychologist. We're originally from Puerto Rico, but we live in the United States right now. We've been practicing as a clinician and counselor for about 10 years at this point. We had an MFT first, which is a degree in marriage and family therapy. And then we went and got our doctorate in clinical psychology. So now we have a clinical practice where we see patients. We also run an LGBTQ clinic in the community for people who have lower income or who just need a different type of service in the community. And that's a little bit about us.
Hi, my name is Sarah Clark from PowerToThePlurals.com. We are 31 years old. We live in the Netherlands with our 2 cats and our amazing 10-year-old son. And we got diagnosed with DID in 2011, 12, and 13.
Hi, we're Melissa, a collective of 6 working together as a team. We were diagnosed in 1991 as multiple personality disorder. We are also an SRA survivor. We're a divorced single mom on disability in the United States.
Hey everybody, I'm Seishin, co-host of the Override System. I'm also the creator of Plural Hub, which is currently the largest existing directory for plural communities on Discord. I consider myself an advocate for systems of all types and enjoy encouraging others to share their plural experiences, regardless of their origin.
Hi, this is B. Duddy. I'm most familiar with various Tulpa communities, Reddit's r/Tulpas, various Discord servers, in particular Tulpa Chat, which I currently own and am in charge of, tulpa.info, and a few other sites.
Hi everybody, my name is Punam and I am an alter in the Phoenix system. I am about 32 years old and I'm a non-human alter, specifically a fairy.
So humanity has been here before. The pivot point between disparate separate communities all being oppressed in similar or overlapping ways, and the moment where they start to talk to one another to see whether or not they can find any common ground and whether they can unite under a banner to have a louder voice and help all of the groups under the banner. It doesn't always go smoothly, but we can look back in history and clearly see this having happened before. It's our idea that with forethought and mature action, we can deliberately pool our resources and set aside differences so that we can take massive action. So I've asked for these panelists to come together and answer some questions for the community. What community or communities are you or y'all most familiar with, and how do they view inclusivity?
We are part of a group called Alternation on Facebook. It's our own support group. It's open to everyone who experiences manyness or is somewhere on the dissociative spectrum. We do ask that people have some sort of need to be in a support group, but if their need is that they really like to share with other people what they did in their lives to gain successful living with multiplicity, then they are still welcome, of course. And we also have a YouTube channel where we have a series on inclusiveness within the DMD and plural community. And we also work actively there on achieving inclusiveness.
Well, I would say I'm most familiar with the Tulpamancy and Traumagenic communities. Tulpamancy is where we first delved into plurality, and it helped us begin to piece things together and realize that we were traumagenic. The Tulpamancy community has always kind of struck me as this fascinating melting pot of various ideologies coming together. You have people that subscribe to the psychological side of things, and you have people, that identify with the metaphysical plane. Typically, they try to respect other folks of different origins, even though they might not always understand the other's experience. I've never really seen any part of the Tulpamancy community that's been hostile or intolerant of other origins, which is pretty great to say the least. The traumagenic side of the community, though, I feel is a little bit more of a wild card. It really boils down to what part of the internet you're on, from what I've seen. Certain parts, like Discord, for example, tend to foster a more welcoming and inclusive community. And you'll be pretty hard-pressed to find communities on Discord that are actively encouraging intolerant behavior. On other places like Tumblr, however, it's a little bit more of a risky environment to be out and proud as an endogenic system, tulpomancer, etc. There tends to be a lot more open hatred and endophobic behavior that goes around in that sphere, as unfortunate as that is to say. When you find the nicer parts of the traumagenic community, though, you'll find that they are often as accepting as the tulpomancy folks can be.
The default posture across most large tulpa communities that I've seen is that all types of plurals and singlets are accepted, but discussion about most other plural topics should be limited to various degrees. Obviously, tulpas being the primary point of discussion. I can say specifically on Tulpa Chat that we have tulpa-related rooms, tulpa discussion, tulpa advice, that are for discussion on tulpa-related topics only, which does exclude other types of plurality. But there is frequent discussion in general rooms of topics about plurality in general. And we even considered adding a plurality discussion room at one point, although ultimately we did not. And that also, on Tulpa Chat and other Tulpa communities, there is fairly frequent discussion about how tulpas might relate to other forms of plurality. This varies, of course, and I know that there are some Tulpa communities that aren't as welcoming about discussion of other types of plurality for various reasons. I'm not sure of any that specifically exclude other types of systems. Part of the whole point of the Tulpa community is to be welcoming of singlets in particular, so I'm not sure that would even really make any sense. Our tulpas is similar. Obviously, discussion topics should be related to tulpas, but there is discussion quite frequently of relation to other types of plurality. Tulpa.info, I don't spend as much time on, but I think is fairly similar. We're also members of various other plural Discord servers, all of which are very inclusive, welcoming members from all system types, and for the most part, really disclaiming any type of exclusivity based on system type. So they are specifically inclusive.
So we are part of two different communities. We are in a body that's disabled. So our body is blind. And with that, along with our mental health, puts us in a category of people with multiple disabilities. We're also our family originally is from India, so we relate strongly. Some of us relate strongly to that. I specifically relate really strongly to that. So those are the two communities that we relate to the most. And as far as how they view inclusivity, I think in America, racial inequality gets a lot of attention, whereas with disabilities, that usually takes the back burner when it comes to fighting for equal access.
We're most familiar with communities on Facebook groups, small chat groups, and local mental health groups as far as our plurality goes. We have a couple of Facebook groups that we help moderate and are extremely inclusive. We've worked very hard to get that way. However, the smaller chat groups and the local mental health groups are not inclusive in any way, not only for plurals, but not even as someone who's been diagnosed for 28 years with DID.
Well, I think we're in a lot of different communities. Regarding the plural community, I would say that we're in a lot of different groups. Sometimes we would be qualified in the endogenic group, other times in traumagenic. Really, we're somewhere in the middle of those two. I think also there's a lot of other overlapping identities, such as being queer. A lot of us have different sexualities, gender, etc. Um, just just a lot of different groups that we're a part of. And I think what's unfortunate is that a lot of those groups don't really get along with each other, right? So we've been on Tumblr, which I'm sure people are already thinking, oh, I wonder how that went. And we just see a lot of infighting there, really, especially between endogenic plurals and traumagenic plurals, and then also this idea of if you have a diagnosis by a psychologist or if you don't, and it gets very intense. So I would say that I'm not sure what the inclusivity is, because it seems like each group is pretty siloed, and a lot of people don't want to talk to each other. I've definitely in Ciscourse seen a lot of people who are just not accepting of any idea outside of their own, or they have this idea that their experience is the correct experience for everyone else. I'm not really sure. So it's unfortunate that I've seen a lot of that. Ironically, I usually see acceptance of other communities in those same groups. So, for example, if I'm in a chat room on Discord, I might see that regardless of what group I'm looking at regarding like the plural community, they might be very accepting of queer people. So then it seems like some of our identities are accepted, but others may not be, right? Um, to add to that, I would say that there's also some difficulty being a person of color and an immigrant, and just not seeing a lot of that reflected in the communities that we've been a part of. So it's difficult. I do think people are trying to make a community that's more inclusive. There's definitely a few groups here and there that we've seen, I would say mostly on Reddit and a few Discord chats, where people are actually inclusive, trying to communicate with each other, and seem to be attempting to basically have us be one large community instead of kind of like basically like siloed off into these smaller groups that are infighting all the time. So I would say that for right now, a lot of it does not seem very inclusive, but I'm hoping that with time it will be that way, because we've been online in the plural DID community, however you want to refer to us, the multiple community back then, since the late 90s, early 2000s. So that tells you all something. And some things have become worse, I would say, but other things have become better. So on the one hand, there's definitely this division between endo and traumagenic and diagnosed and not. Some of that wasn't as intense back then, I feel. The diagnosis was, but not if you're endogenic or traumagenic, or if you're a tulpa or anything like that. So on that end, I think things have gotten worse. On the other end, there's a lot more acceptance, I think, of other identities, like I said before. So the queer community. At the beginning, I remember a lot of the groups did not seem very accepting of the queer community or of any type of diversity at all. Even something as simple as people having different genders in the same system. I remember a lot of groups were not accepting of that. So, I mean, we have quite a ways to go, but I think that at least there's been some positive changes in the community. So I hope that continues.
Thank you so much for your answer. What does plural inclusiveness mean to you or you and as a group?
For me, personally, plural inclusiveness means striking a good balance between origin-inclusive spaces and individual community spaces. Both of these things are really important, and it really doesn't have to be one or the other. At the end of the day, all systems are experiencing more or less the same thing. It's really just our origin that separates us all in the grand scheme of things. We may perceive ourselves differently, and our gears may turn differently under the surface, but in the end, we are all very similar. Multiple people sharing a body. I feel like embracing this reality is very key. Plural inclusiveness means coming together and accepting that we may all have our differences, but at the end of the day, we do share some common ground. Together, we can learn from each other and become stronger as a whole because of it. Don't get me wrong, Exclusive spaces for specific origins are absolutely important too. Sometimes you may just feel best in places that are full of people that experience things just like you do. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, though it certainly is not a reason to put others down.
To us, plural inclusiveness, means having spaces, not just small spaces, but large, significant spaces where different kinds of plural systems, and even singlets, can get together and talk and discuss with mutual understanding and respect about issues they face in plurality and otherwise. And of course, also just talk about general things, talk about fun things, talk about their lives, about the news and sports and everything. It means sharing resources, guides, tips and tricks, maybe even fun things to do as a system across lines of different system types. It means including singlets too, and people that are unsure about whether or not they're plural, when warranted, of course. It doesn't mean that all spaces need to be completely inclusive. It's completely valid to have spaces, rooms devoted to specific system types, specific issues, but most should be, in our opinion, unless there's a good reason. And of course, to us specifically, it means we can meet a lot of different people and systems from different backgrounds in plural communities where we can be completely open about who we are, and we think that's a really good thing.
I would say plural inclusivity to myself, and I would say a majority of our system really focuses on accepting other systems for where they're at in their process of healing and discovering themselves. We were diagnosed in May of 2017 with DID, and have found a lot of inclusion and acceptance in groups online, which has really helped our healing process and our process in accepting who we are.
Plural inclusivity is very important to us. It means regardless of whether you're diagnosed or not and what your diagnosis is, your genesis, whether it's traumagenic or endogenic, however you view yourself, or where a plural is on their life journey, regardless of those things, we are all part of a larger group. We're working very hard to make that umbrella over all plurals, regardless of those things or any other activities or belief systems. I believe we believe that it's important to include everyone in discussions on whether you're a single person or a plural. We need all people on the same page, and it's not happening in a lot of places.
I feel like that's kind of what we were talking about a little bit already, but to be clearer, I would say that being plural inclusive would be just accepting all systems, regardless of why they exist. I honestly don't know why that matters to other people, but it seems to be a really big sticking point. So I think that no matter how a system came to be, or who's in a system, or how many people, or whatever, just accepting each other. I mean, the reality is we're still a relatively small group when we think about it, right? And when we're splitting off into all these even smaller groups, it's hard to then advocate for each other and be able to get singlets to kind of see us as we really are. You know, I feel like we have bigger issues than fighting internally is what's really bothering me about all of this. Like, if you think about things like Split, right? That movie came out, 1-2 years ago, not very long ago. A lot of people still think that that's who we all are, regardless of what group you're in. That is kind of how people might qualify you, or might classify you as. So that would be an example of a way that I wish the community, I know some people did try, but I wish that instead of fighting internally, we could have focused our effort onto that, right? Or onto helping other therapists actually get the training they need to help people who might need therapy, and not related to being plural. That could be what you're looking for. But I just mean going to therapy in general, because it's really hard to go in for anything if you're working with somebody who is not accepting of you being plural, right? So my point is, I feel like all of us, if we can figure out how to get along better with each other, we would be able to advocate better for each other with the bigger issues that are facing us right now, in my opinion.
Plural inclusiveness to us means that we are open and accepting of everyone who experiences manyness, no matter the reason why, and that we don't invade their privacy or ask them questions about their past or other invading questions, that we just accept people for whom they are as a group entity and that they are welcome.
Is there a time you or y'all felt excluded that you or y'all can share?
Most recently, we felt very, very excluded in a local mental health group that we were taking part in. We were pulled aside the very first time we were invited to join the group, but pulled aside the first time we attended and told not to go into DID in any way or dissociative disorders in any way, shape, or form, and not to share anything regarding our traumas or our SRA survivorness. The group was helpful. It was nice. We felt like we were there as a support to the other members, but that we could not get the support we needed, nor let people in to get to know us because we couldn't be us in that group. It was interesting as different, once a week the group would meet and different people in the system would be in group depending on the week and what the topic was in group that time. And we got some curious looks at times from some of the other group members, but we could not explain things. It felt horrible. It felt like here we are invited to this group to share our wisdom, experience, and hope. And we could do that, but only in a tiny little box and not as we.
So this goes back to when we were a child. We were actually talking about this with one of our outside friends a couple days ago, where it was, I guess, around the age of 12, I wanted to be on the soccer team at school and was really excited about being on the soccer team because our oldest brother was on the soccer team and we really looked up to him. And just enjoyed the sport. And we went to the meeting at school and, filled out the forms, and we got on the bus to go home and found out a lot of the kids on the bus were making fun of us for wanting to play soccer because we're blind. And, what blind kid would play soccer on a team that doesn't have anybody else with disability? So that really, really hurt us super bad. It hurt us to the point where we didn't go out for the soccer team at all. And it's one of the things that I regret us not pushing through and doing. But then again, we were 12, so there's that.
I would say that at this point, we primarily identify as endogenic. And so I think that on Tumblr, which we've been on for a long time, I don't know, years, especially once we started identifying that way, the amount of people who were like attacking us and making all these assumptions about us was really intense. So there's been times where we've had to step away from our account just to get a break from all of that. I still have no idea why people have such a difficult time with that. I think what's ironic is that when people are making a lot of assumptions, they assume that we haven't gone through trauma or that we wouldn't relate to traumagenic systems, which neither of those things are true, or that we haven't been diagnosed, which that's not true either. So I think there's this idea where it's basically like, oh, if you're in this group, then that means all these things about you all as a system. And even if you don't fit that, I've decided that you do, right? And so it just seemed like it was really hard to have a conversation. I was disappointed with people, not just me, I mean, I'm talking for us as a system, but we were disappointed with people who we had actually respected and looked up to or had relationships with, like as in we talked online and whatnot, who as soon as we started to defend everyone being accepted, responded really negatively. I would say some people I'm sure are not on our friends list anymore, as in they have taken us off from what I can see. Other people wanted me to stop following them. Like, I even remember once where we were just trying to find more systems online just to add and get to know more people. And so we went through quite a few. And we didn't notice that someone had specifically said they didn't want anyone who was endogenic following them. So after we follow them, we deleted them instantly, because it's like, well, if they don't want us around, we're not gonna be around if that's not what they want. And almost instantly, we received a message from the person telling us very clearly to stop following them, to not interact with them, etc. Which we responded, we actually already did that because we saw your info right after we added you. But it was interesting that there was just this really big response, and I've seen that many, many times. So those are just, those are just a few examples I can think of. There are honestly plenty more. So I hope that there's a way for people to come together and kind of not get stuck in that us versus them mentality, because I feel like we all have a lot more in common than not. So I wish that it could be seen from that point of view instead.
I don't think we've ever been excluded, because if we notice something like that, we leave, and so we've never really been part of that community anyway.
Not particularly, no. I have seen that there are spaces where tulpa systems are not welcome. I understand that there are sometimes good reasons for these spaces to exist, and wouldn't feel the need to talk about tulpas on, for example, Reddit's r/did. We have heard a lot about negative, non-inclusive communities on Tumblr in particular. I don't really use Tumblr that much these days. My tulpa Diana actually does. She has a blog. We both worry that sometimes maybe someone negative, someone from around that space will message her or start complaining. But luckily that doesn't really seem to have happened so far.
Well, back in the day, when we identified as a tulpa system, we would often put a little blurb in our bio of social media platforms that said that we were a tulpamancy system. We would share our experiences there, hoping to find others that could relate. In this one particular instance, while we were minding our own business, somebody went out of their way to make a public call-out post towards us, stating that we weren't real and that we needed to stop. That was a pretty big shocker to us. We brushed it off and carried on, and made ample use of the block button, but it kind of marked our first real hands-on experience with the more vocal exclusionists.
Why do you or y'all think or not think that community inclusion is important?
Community inclusion is so important, because once you feel that you're included in a group, you have a place where you can truly and fully be yourself and be present and be known, and all of those things can lend itself towards healing and can lend itself to progressing forward. So for us, being involved in a community makes our lives so much easier to manage, and just having somebody around that understands and is willing to not only sympathize with what we're going through, but also empathize with what we're going through, that means a lot to us, and it's really powerful. So I think being involved in a community and community inclusion, where people come together, is really also where change happens. And change happens in, large numbers, and together we're stronger. And yeah.
So I think, kind of as we've been saying through this, one of the, we do think that community inclusion is important, and one of the reasons would be so that we can get more support from each other and help each other out when these big issues come up that we need to be addressing. Also, we have enough stigma coming at us from all other sides, and having it within the group it's pretty miserable because when you think about it, overall, a lot of people don't even think that we exist, right? And if they do, then we're violent or murderers or something. I mean, if you look at the movies and media that comes out. So it's kind of like, okay, I feel like it would be better if we could just support each other through these things that we have in common instead of attacking each other all the time or making assumptions that don't really make any sense. Because I feel like the labels are put onto people, but there's some people become very limited in that if you have one of these labels, then all the others are invalid. So I think that with community inclusion, we would have a lot more support. We would be able to talk to each other more openly. I think people like us, which I'm sure there are many who have various different ways that their system functions, could be open about that, right? Instead of being like, do I join the group that's saying they only want people who are diagnosed with DID, the group who isn't requiring that, the group that requires some other thing, like it's very hard. So I do think that is important. And I think that if we can manage that now, then people who are, just coming to deal with being a system or being open or whatever, maybe it would be easier for them. Because I think it would be pretty scary for someone to come out if their first experience is with seeing a really negative like cis course, maybe online. I think that would be hard. So I hope that we're able to, all of us together, have more inclusivity so people don't feel as marginalized now or in the future.
I think community inclusion is so important. As you mentioned in the beginning, Crisses, we've been here before, we've tried this before, and we didn't succeed. And I think back then we didn't have the power of the internet, and we didn't have the knowledge that we have now. And I think this time we should really put in the efforts from all sides, and we're luckily seeing that all sides are building bridges so we can meet up in the middle. And I think that's going to bring the change this time. And I hope that many more people will be part of the umbrella term and the umbrella in general as to provide a bigger voice to gain more in the world, as it's still so singular normative.
We do think it's very important for several reasons. If plurality is ever to be publicly known and accepted, it would be far easier to achieve that goal if various communities come together to provide a united front rather than acting like squabbling subgroups acting against each other rather than for a single goal. Also, a lot of the issues that plural systems have are shared across different system types, from things like how to relate to the outside world, to resolving internal issues, even to things like fun activities and games that systems can play, are definitely similar across different system types. We also think that different communities can learn from each other. I've heard on several occasions that tulpamancy techniques can help other types of systems better communicate with each other and share memories. And I've also seen tulpa systems learn from resources created by other communities for issues, for example, on how to internally communicate and be more equal. And all of these types of things are much easier with various types of inclusive communities existing and being popular.
I personally feel like peace between the various communities is important to not only further our personal understanding of plurality and how the human brain works, but also that we are stronger together. When it comes to raising awareness of multiplicity, we're going to have to be quite loud, louder than the likes of Hollywood. Rather than spend time and energy being at war with those that experience things differently from you, the energy will be much better spent working together. Unhealthy exclusion is usually driven by a lack of understanding of the opposing party more than anything else. Who knows, maybe the key to understanding your own origin lies in learning more about how others experience theirs. The human experience is not so black and white after all.
Community inclusion is important to us, extremely important to us, because standing in small stigmatized groups makes us weaker and more vulnerable to outside influences. It makes it easier for anyone not in the group to make fun of, to call fake, to whatever, to bully. By coming together, we stand as a larger number. That's harder, much, much harder to ignore, much, much harder to push to the side. By being exclusive to a diagnosis or small group, we're doing to others what we really hated being done to us when we were excluded.
How have you or y'all worked to help the community be more inclusive?
I think we've helped the community by writing articles about inclusiveness. We've created videos about inclusiveness, and we have the third biggest DID Facebook group that is open to anyone on the dissociative spectrum or anyone who experiences pluralness for another reason that needs support or is fantastic at giving support. We also speak out when we see gatekeeping or when we see people getting hurt by others in the community, and we hope more people will engage in that as well.
As the current owner and person in charge of Tulpa Chat, I have ensured that, while the focus of the community naturally remains on tulpas, all systems, as well as singlets and questioning people, are welcome to discuss their unique issues and how they might relate to tulpa topics, which happens quite often. We also participate in various open-ended and inclusive servers that otherwise see few tulpa systems, and help discuss similar issues that are shared across system types. Advice, both giving and receiving. I'm also hoping that events such as this will bring various communities together and lead in the end to more openness and interconnectedness.
When it comes to helping the community become more accepting of inclusiveness, I've held pretty tightly to the kill 'em with kindness motto. Those that vehemently attack other origins are often beyond reasoning if you try and face them head on. So, the next best thing is to take a step back and help the inclusive parts of the community flourish. That is part of my goal with Plural Hub. Through the Hub, we advertise communities that are both origin-specific and origin-inclusive, assisting with people finding new informative resources and other things of that sort. We also enforce a no-discourse rule, barring servers listed with us from promoting any type of origin-phobic behavior. My hope is that through Plural Hub and the various servers listed with us, we are setting a good example of what we should strive for, agreeing that we are all different from each other, but learning to accept that and all the knowledge that comes with it.
We are very proud to be a moderator for a couple of Facebook groups. The admin and mod team has worked hard, many hours, much thought, Skype calls at all hours, all over the world, for our team worked very hard to bring inclusivity to the group under the Plural umbrella, regardless of diagnosis, genesis, or formal mental health care to its members. We also worked hard in the smaller group to create a forum where an SRA survivor felt that they were safe to go into the deeper, that's not right, not deeper, opened up a group for SRA survivors as a safe forum for more intense subjects and more graphic before Facebook rules changed and we had to archive that group.
I think that one is a little complicated. I think in the coming out panel, it might give some light onto why it's been complicated. So we'll try to make it shorter. Online, we usually do, if we have the energy for it, try to step in when people are being terrible to each other. Not in going into the same being terrible to them either. That's not what I'm talking about, but more stepping in and saying, hey, can we accept that both of these things may be true? Can we see that maybe both people or all people involved, let's say both systems, have something valuable to say and should be respected. So there's been plenty of times where we stepped in that way. One thing that we've done is that we try to give people actual information from psychology. And so we're putting it out there because we see a lot of misinformation about psychology. It's not actually psychology, but online. And it's used in a way to really hurt other people. not only is that not how that should be used, obviously that's not the point, but it's also from people who don't have an education in psychology, don't actually have the knowledge, are not citing anything that's like something that actually exists. I hope you all understand what I'm trying to say, but we've seen that a lot. And that's something that honestly hurts us more because of the fact that we are a psychologist and a system. So it kind of feels like on both sides we're kind of feeling that pressure, right? So one as a licensed clinician, another one as a system who's in the community. So in those times, we do try to step in a way that's probably it's still in a way in the community, but probably more closer to the way we work and using the information we actually have from our education to see if people are able to be more open. In that sometimes we'll cite things that are different from what the person is saying, basically just to get them to explore a different point of view or give people resources, kind of things like that. So that's online. In person, I think that's why we were saying, like, I feel like the other panel would explain more, but we basically try as much as we can through our job to help people. The shortest way I can answer that, because it seems like a very complicated question, is that we focus in like IRL basically on teaching new clinicians about the plural community. And we do take it from a plural positive point of view. So not only, yes, people who are plural actually exist, no, they're not violent or murderers or anything like that. And also having them come from a point of view of being plural positive, which means not pathologizing a system, looking more at who people actually are. So I would say that a lot of our advocacy and movement in this community is on the other end with clinicians, because we help to train a lot of new clinicians who are just starting to see clients. And the hope is that, especially because we're working with them at the beginning of their career, that maybe some of that will stick and we'll have more therapists who are at least not terrible to us, let's put it that way. And the reason I say that, well, one, I think we need that, but also we do think that's part of what can sometimes cause issues in the community, because we've sometimes seen people who seem to cite their therapist or things they've experienced in therapy as a reason why something doesn't exist. Or even if you go back to the diagnostic question, like unless somebody tells me I have this diagnosis, and I'm not real, or you're not real, or whatever. And in that sense, it reminds me a little bit of how the trans community, some people can be, or I feel like it's gotten better. That idea that, well, if a psychologist tells you that you have gender-like dysphoria, then you're trans. But if not, maybe not, right? And that doesn't make any sense either, because it's your identity. So those are just to stop it there, because if not, we can go on for a while. Those are some of the ways that we've been trying to help the community on and offline.
We are honestly pretty new to the DID community. Even though we were diagnosed in 2017, we've asked a lot of questions online, but what our goal is to raise more awareness about systems that also have disabilities and that also identify as a system where there are people of color, or where the body is, where the body is of color. So we are trying to raise awareness by doing those things, by being open about our story as much as we can, as much as we can, while still feeling safe right now. So that's what we're doing.
What two things do you or y'all think our listeners can do to help build a more inclusive community?
Number one, my first thing is be willing to consider and accept systems, circumstances, and experiences different from your own. This doesn't mean that you have to blindly accept everything someone says, rather that you simply listen, assume good faith unless you have a good reason not to, and try to come to an understanding. From the outside, after all, plurality looks weird, strange, and impossible to almost everyone. I can say that, having not even known about tulpas, or much beyond a general idea of DID, as recently as a few years ago. So why would you, as someone who knows that plurality is not impossible, or maybe even all that weird, make that accusation of someone else? Number 2 is make sure that inclusiveness is part of the culture of any community you're in as much as possible, especially if you're someone with some power or responsibility in that community. That can include enshrining it in the rules, making sure that any moderators or other staff are inclusive and willing to ensure that the community is by taking appropriate action, and making it clear to newcomers and other members in daily talks and interactions that your community should be exclusive. Of course, that doesn't mean that all spaces necessarily need to be inclusive, or that everyone has to be accepted if their actions are truly damaging to the community. But it should mean that people shouldn't be excluded from a community or allowed to be argued at, yelled at, or drummed out of a community without a very good reason.
Honestly, even the little things make a huge difference in the long run. Don't get me wrong, we all may not understand something someone experiences, but that alone is not a reason to put a person down. A lot of the time, the healthier and kinder option is just to let them be, live and let live. You don't always have to agree with what someone is saying, so just step away. Spiteful acts will only cultivate more spiteful acts. Please remember that. I also feel that in trying to build a more inclusive community, it's really important to respect others' communities' boundaries. As I've stated before, while inclusiveness is important, so are separate spaces for different system types. Invading others' spaces is rude and disrespectful, and that kind of stuff won't really help us further a mutual understanding and respect. In short, treat others like you would like to be treated, very excellently.
The biggest 2 things we see that listeners can do to help build more inclusivity in the community are the same things that work within for the community. To us, acceptance and communication are the ground rules, most basic things that we have to have inside as a system to be able to work together, to be able to appreciate and accept each other for who we are, where we've been, where we're going. And I believe those are the 2 biggest things that are important to all of us as a community to let other folks in for inclusivity.
I would say one of the big things would be to not have spaces that are exclusive. I understand that that's sometimes needed, don't get me wrong. But I think there's a difference between saying, we want this space for people who have experienced X because we want this to be a space where we talk about what that experience is like, right? I think there's a difference between that and saying, if you are in any of these groups, you can't join us because you're not a part of this group. And there's just a very different sense in those 2 things. So one example would be if let's say you're running a Discord chat, right? Maybe, and I've seen this happen in the ones that we enjoy, maybe you have different rooms for people who identify in different ways. So you might have a place for one type of system and for another, like rooms in the chat itself, rather than an entire community that says, if you are in X group, you are not allowed to join, we will not interact with you, we will not talk to you. And that's very different. So that type of oppression, I don't think is helpful for either side. That's the interesting part. I of course it's hurtful to the people being targeted, but I think it's also hurtful for the people doing that targeting. First of all, some of them might actually be in the other group that they're targeting. Maybe they don't realize it, or maybe they don't want to be out about that. But even the fact that you're attacking another group that's very similar to your own, I don't see how that would be helpful. So I guess that would be one thing. I think the other is just to be able to listen to each other without attacking first. Sometimes, there's just misunderstandings. It's not that if somebody hurts you, you need to take that. I'm not saying that either, right? It's more that maybe giving people a minute and seeing if, before you assume what they're saying, if that's what they're actually saying. Now, if they really are being terrible to you, then you can respond as appropriate, stop talking to them, whatever you want to do, but at least giving people the space to have a conversation with you rather than making assumptions, and kind of starting from that point, because I think when you do, it doesn't allow for a conversation, because then both people or everyone basically gets defensive, and then it can turn into a flame war pretty quickly, right? So if there's people who are your friends or follow you on social media or whatever, and same for the other person, it can become something a lot larger, and I don't think it needs to get to that point. So those would be the two main things. So one would be, just to be able to be more open to each other, and the other would be to try to not make these exclusive spaces that are, in a way that they can harm other people. So, and again, just to note the difference, like there's a difference between a safe space where you want to talk about a specific topic or experience, and a space that says anyone who is not in this group is excluded. Like there's a difference between those two. So thinking about that.
What I think two of the most important things that our listeners can do to help create an inclusive community is to have an open mind about other people, other systems, other system members. Know that they also have a story just like you and you all, and that their story is valid. And also, I guess number two would be that once you find your community, that's where you can make change and make real change, which is something that I know we are all striving for, is to make change and make everything about DID more accepted and less stigmatized.
I think the first thing we have to do is comparing trauma, weighing trauma, and we have to stop saying trauma-based versus non-trauma-based systems, as I don't think it's a fair assumption to make or a label to put on someone else. We don't know, they don't know, and I think we have to stop using that term. The second thing is that we have to voice our opinions, and we have to step up for the one in front of us, even if that one is a stranger. So if we see someone getting attacked or hurt, or there is gatekeeping behavior, we have to say something, and we have to let the rest of the community know that we no longer accept certain behavior. I think that's the only way we're going to create this inclusiveness on a larger, much larger scale that we're aiming for.
Thank you so much for participating in this panel. Do you have any final remarks?
The world is big enough for plurals of all types. Though they may seem scarce sometimes, there are people out there waiting and listening to learn more about our wacky brains and how we experience them. We are here, and we exist. We are stronger and louder together. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the Plural Positivity World Conference for having me.
The only final remarks we have is that we are a we. It's very hard in our community, in our local city that we live in, to exist as an outsider. We are plural. We are not the only ones. I have other plural friends that live not 5 minutes away from me, and they feel the same way. This exclusivity makes it so hard to be we, who we are, where we want to go, what we want to do. We have to be very careful at all times how we speak. Much of the time I use I when it's not I. We work as a collective team, folks, and it's not an I. We use I when we're speaking of our own separate personal experiences, beliefs, opinions. But when we're working as a collective, we are we. And it's very hard to do that in a community where it's not acceptable to be we. We're very proud to be asked to be on this forum. We're very, very glad that this conference is taking place. It's amazing. It's something I've always wanted to do. Go to a DID/Plural conference, but it's, as a single mom on disability on a fixed budget, it's impossible. Thank you for all of this conference. Thank you for the idea. Thank you for it being free, online, accessible to anyone, and thank you for including us in this panel.
I think we mostly hope that people will be able to listen to this panel. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different opinions from different systems, and be able to just take a step back and think about it. I really do think that this type of negative discussion that's been happening is really hurting the community, and thinking of a way that we can be inclusive and supportive of each other. I really do believe that if we're all able to do that, it would help so much. You know, people already have enough stress as it is, and the fact that we're adding to it and hurting each other is just it's not going to help anybody. So if we're able to do that, I think all of us together can change things, like I said, for the future generation and for ourselves. So that's kind of what we hope that everybody is able to at least consider, and see if they can go from if they're on one extreme or the other, at least move a little bit towards the middle. I think that in itself would be really helpful.
Thank you so much to Crisses for hosting this panel, and thank you so much to all the other panelists for being a part of this. I think it was a great experience, and I hope this will become a great resource for the rest of the community and for the groundworking that we're doing here. Thank you so much for being a part of this and for listening, and have a wonderful day.
I just thank you all so much for listening. Thank you so much, Crisses, for allowing us to be part of this panel. This is such a great way to jump in into this awesome movement, and I'm super excited to get to know all of you guys more. So thank you so much. Bye.
Well, thank you, everybody. That concludes the panel on Bridging Plural Experiences, Community Inclusion. Thank you so much.